Welcome to Sit Around the Fire, the podcast dedicated to the men and women on the front lines, first responders, military personnel, and their families. I'm your host, Ashlea Dillard, a retired firefighter paramedic turned full-time mental health professional. My passion is helping the helpers. Together, we'll explore the challenges, the triumphs, and the real stories behind the uniform. In each episode, we'll talk about mental, physical, and spiritual wellness, along with the unique culture that comes along with serving in a high-stress environment. From building strong relationships to navigating the weight of the job, this is a space where we can be real, share experiences, and support one another. Whether you're on the front lines yourself or you're supporting someone who is, this is a podcast to remind you that you are not alone. So grab a seat, pull up to the fire, and let's get into it. Sit Around the Fire podcast. Welcome. Here we go. You guys, I am so stoked and excited to be talking about the fawn response today. That if ever some people, we needed a swift kick in the pants to understand this is what's happening with us and why, this is what will be happening and why. So I'm really, really excited to talk about it. I think that this is one of the most impactful realizations that we come to, is understanding that some of these behaviors that we see within the fawn nervous system protective output are some of the maladaptive coping mechanisms that we've used in the past, and it's time to evaluate and see whether those are still serving us here in the present and how we can work with our nervous system so that we don't always go into a fawn response. So let's continue our story. We've already been seeing the gazelle work through a couple of different responses to the threat, aka the cheetah coming through the grass. And we've talked about flight and fight being in the sympathetic side of the nervous system, the doing actions, following those stress hormones. Last time we talked about functional freeze, and how that complete need to just collapse and be immobilized before making a decision, and or when everything feels incredibly overwhelming and we're unable to make a decision. So now we're going to be moving into the next and the final F of this big tragedy that we're following, and that's called fawn. And the fawn response is very much a behavior adaptation that's based on survival needs, including our attachment style, and a response to the nervous system dysregulation that we have. The interesting dichotomy around fawning is that, again, it's these two things. It has to do with our attachment system, which we're going to dive a little bit more into here in a minute, but then also highly, highly correlated to being in a dysregulated nervous system. So let's look at this in terms of the gazelle. So the gazelle, who's been kind of hanging out in the Serengeti, eating the grass, everything is good, in that nice balanced state, catches sight of the lion moving through the grass and decides, okay, to mitigate this threat, I'm actually going to have the lion over for a tea party. And the thought is, if I can invite the lion over, I'll make scones, I'll make mini muffins, I'll have this really fabulous time. That way I can befriend the threat, or to make sure that the threat is taken care of so that I am taken care of in response. So we often see some kind of trigger for us as humans. This looks like a trigger coming in, whether it's can be very relational or connection based. This is something that's kind of unique about the fawn side of it, is it's extremely relational. So it is that trigger is then going to heighten our activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So foot on the gas pedal, let's go to work, we have to do something. And that fawn behavior is going to show up because in its entirety, the goal is survival and to re-regulate the system. So not only are we at risk of staying alive and being okay, but we also have to re-regulate the nervous system. So again, this one is very complex when it comes to fawn because we're dealing with two different things interrelated together. So fawning often accompanies people with very hypersensitive threat response. So if they are at a high level of dysregulation all the time, they are going to fall into a pattern that they're going to say or do whatever is needed to re-regulate and create safety for themselves. This is where we see the people-pleasing side of fawning show up. So whatever needs to be done to take care of the other person so that translates into me being okay on the other side. The discomfort that dysregulation offers is so much greater than the pain of self-sacrifice. So it is, in the world or the idea of fawning, it is so much more uncomfortable for me to be at risk of being accepted and survival and the attachment threat happening that is worse than sacrificing myself so that I can have those things or the illusion of those things. This fawning response is 100% protective, reflexive, and survival driven. It is the idea of whatever we have to do to stay safe and whatever we have to do to stay alive. We can dial this back into our attachment style, thinking about how much we've needed caretaking, attachment, and social connection with one another. And like I said, we are going to look at this kind of attachment style. If this is something that's kind of a foreign or a new concept to you, we're going to explore that in just a moment. But without the awareness, this can lead to an extreme dishonesty, manipulation, self-abandonment, overgiving, self-harm, unsustainable even relationship, unfulfilled and unexpressed life, unconscious resentment of breaking our own boundaries without even realizing it. So all of these things that end up happening for us lead to these breaking of our own boundaries. It can look like trouble even just making decisions because we are so adapted into this codependency side of things, which if we look at and really kind of boil it down, codependency is a pattern of one person assuming responsibility for meeting another person's own things due to the detriment of their own health and well-being and desires. So it is again, we talked about the self-sacrifice, but it's whatever one person has to do to take care of another one. So, for example, if you're okay, I'm okay. I'll do whatever I have to do to take care of you because that makes me feel okay on the other side. And this 100% is going to lead you down a path where this becomes a pattern of now you're doing it in all of the context of your relationships. And the people-pleasing codependency side of things, I think for us in the world of first responders, it kind of gets praised sometimes of always being the yes guy, the one who always says yes to overtime, or always says yes to this special committee, or always says yes to training someone new. You become celebrated because you're the guy that will always say yes. And we don't often think about what the price tag is for this behavior on the other side. So always saying yes and never saying no. Whenever we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. And whenever we say no, we're saying yes to someone else. Or something else. But in the lens of looking at this through the fawning side is we're saying yes to everyone else 100% of the time, or 10 out of 10 times, because the attachment and the safety side is so important to us that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the price tag is. I have to say yes. I have to be the one to do that. And this really, really can lead into some weird codependency side of things, because the codependency, if we look at this in a different way. It is really a tension between attachment versus authenticity. So we have two very different competing needs, and every single human being is on a spectrum for this. So nobody is going to be like fully only attachment driven. There is going to be the authenticity side as well. It just could be that one side might be tugging at the rope a little bit stronger than the other side. So I want to look at attachment. When we think of attachment, it really is a drive for closeness, both physical and emotional. Hey guys, thanks for taking the time to sit down and listen to the podcast. Whether you're actually sitting and watching, or you're driving or multitasking, whatever you do, it's super awesome that we can connect with you around the fire. If you want to get further connected into the community that we talk a lot about here, I invite you to check out the link in the show notes below. It'll give you an opportunity to stay connected and at the forefront of all the communication happening. I'm going to send you something special to start working on your nervous system today, so keep an eye on your inbox. And now, back to the show. This is something that, like it or not, like classic therapy language would be, a lot of stuff boils down to what your childhood and what your development time looked like. And we just have to be okay with that's how it is. That doesn't give you a bypass or an excuse for, well, that's just how it was. If you want to change your narrative, take responsibility and change your narrative. But you have to be aware that this comes from somewhere. That ever since you were very small, your nervous system has been working on taking information in to adapt into an environment and a world that is one goal driven, and that's safety and survival. So whatever has happened in the past, whatever messages have come into the system of how am I being taken care of, or am I being taken care of, there is a need and a necessary need for a human infant to feel that attachment connection. That survival need is correlated with these really complex neural circuits that are governing behaviors designed to keep us close to people when we need survival. Let's boil this down a little bit further. So let's say, we'll do two examples. So let's say there's an infant that cries. I would say most of the time, when an infant cries, that spurs on a caregiver to pay attention or to respond to the need of the infant. What happens for this infant in these neural circuit sides is that the message comes into the system of, okay, if I have a need, someone's going to show up for me. That is how this attachment style and attachment needs are addressed. If I have a need, someone's going to show up for me. Now, if we take this a step farther, let's say that we have a kiddo who does something in terms of, like, they're either they act in a certain way, they're being loud, or they misbehave, or maybe they have an emotional outburst, something like that. Let's say that the caregivers tell this kid that, oh, okay, you're being too much, you're being too loud, you don't ever do that again, don't ever show emotion again like that. Another common one could be like, boys don't cry, or be a big boy, or be tough, go to your room, or go take a time out. And I have to do a disclaimer that I'm not coming at anybody about discipline tactics or what we have to do as parents, but what I am talking about is what some of these behaviors can translate into the nervous system when we look at it that way. So if this little kiddo is told to go to their room, you're being too much, go to your room, the internal messages that are received in through these neural circuits through the nervous system is saying, okay, whatever I just did right there, whatever display of emotion, whatever behavior, anything like that, that put me at risk of safety and survival, and I'm never going to do that again. Where we can run into some issues with this later on is when we fast forward, because remember, this is absolutely the framework that we have to work off of. And this attachment style gets perpetuated over time through the context of different relationships and adaptations as we're learning how to function throughout the world through our nervous system. So what I can see with this happening later on down the road is when people come into my office to talk to me and they have trouble with, like, I don't know how to feel emotions. I don't know how to express things. I don't know any of this kind of emotional side of things. It can very easily be broken down into this concept of what someone a lot more famous than me said is, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you've never been in a context of a safe situation or a place where you can learn how to do these things, you're not going to have any framework for that. An example of this looks like, because we all know I love to speak in metaphors. So a metaphor for this can be, if I came to you and I said, hey, Joe, why don't you learn how to speak Chinese? Just speak Chinese. It's not that hard. Let's do it right now. And you say, like, Ash, I don't have any context of this. I've never been around any Chinese people. I've never taken Chinese language lessons. I've never lived in China. Like, I don't know anything about Chinese. And I said, well, what's wrong with you? Like, why don't you just speak Chinese? And you say, I literally have nothing. I don't know what I don't know. It's exactly the same framework that we have to take into consideration when we look at this. If you don't have a strong framework to go off of here, you're not going to be able to do these things like show emotions, feel emotions, express emotions, like connect with other people, is because you don't have this framework. And your attachment style has very much taught you differently. So again, we're going to break into attachment more, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. But I want to set you up for understanding a little bit better of what this actually does look like. Let's circle back to authenticity. So authenticity is a quality of being true to oneself and the capacity to shape one's life from a deep knowledge of that self. This is where we can really ground into being able to express emotions, to communicate needs and desires, and to be able to create things and explore and really like get curious about who we are and still feel like we can be accepted for that. It is also a survival need, right? To know our gut feelings arise and we honor them. That's this whole kind of connection between the two. We have to remain connective and responsive to instinct at the same time. That's where this tension can come in, because we have our attachment style saying like, wait, this is how we've had to do things before. This is how we really trust other people. This is how other people accept and love and keep us safe. And we survive in this mentality. And that authenticity or instinct can come in and say, well, I'm challenging that. Like, I want to show up in my full capacity and my authentic self and do things this way. And it's a battle between the two until we learn how to work within both capacities. So if we were in a home where we were neglected or had a perception of neglect, again, we're going to learn the specific patterning that shows up within our nervous system, which translates to what we call kind of some leaky boundaries or trouble with boundary, because it is our number one priority to secure connection above anything else. So we become and what we refer to it as like a very hypersensitive need for attachment is because the neglect or an idea or perception that we were neglected in some way, emotionally, physically, mentally, that's going to lead us to that behavior. Again, the number one goal is to prioritize connection above everything else. And I really, really need you to hear that and understand what that means. Is the self-sacrificing, the people-pleasing, the codependency, lack of boundaries behavior, and the fawning response is due to that hypersensitive need for attachment. And it is okay if that's where you're at right now. Again, you don't have to live in that narrative the rest of your entirety, right? You can learn a new way. You can learn how to have that healthy attachment within your nervous system and learn what healthy attachment looks like within connection and relationship to other people. But the hypersensitivity to needing attachment is like the way a nerve will become hypersensitive if it lacks stimulus because it needs fuel and activation to stay healthy and alive. So in turn, we can become very hypersensitive to attachment needs and hypervigilant about ensuring we are not abandoned. This is the physical, emotional state of this happening. So again, I want you to hear that. This is super, super crucial, super important. It's just like a nerve not having enough stimulus because nerves have to have fuel and activation to be healthy and alive. That codependency side is not, it doesn't feel safe in it's not feeling safe in our body, but our body depends on another being or a system to create that safety. So this relationship is relief and stress at the same time, which is so ironic. I want you to hear that. I get really excited about this. Like I said, I gave you the preemptive warning. Fawning is my favorite thing to talk about. This is both temporary relief followed by an increased stress load because, okay, I have self-sacrificed, I've people-pleased, so now I'm getting that quick dopamine fix of I'm accepted, I'm loved, I'm validated, I feel safe and secure, and then, oh my gosh, when is this going to go away? When is the rug going to get pulled out underneath me? Like what else do I have to keep doing in order to maintain this? It's temporary. This is not going to last for forever. Therefore, it requires a ton of energy and focus to maintain this whole hamster wheel of a cycle when we look at this attachment need. Now, when we think about this in a little bit deeper context as well with attachment, is part of our implicit social memory is very much shaped by our early experiences with our caretakers, like we've kind of talked about. So when we learn something, when our nervous system has experienced this idea of safety and survival, it literally gets stuck, imprinted, encoded, whatever you want to look at it with the lens with, into our nervous system and to our brain. So these learning histories that shape these experiences, dependent networks that connect the insula and the cingulate cortexes with the amygdala and other regions that regulate arousal, affect emotion. So there's a lot of really big science lingo. But to break it down is understanding that all of these things are literally stored within your brain and your nervous system. So you've heard me talk about this before in terms of like only working with certain modalities of therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy or emotion-focused therapy, anything like that. You can fill in the blank. This is sometimes where we run into this really big problem, this headache, because it makes sense for us to say or to think about, yes, all relationships can be safer. I can be in safe relationships. I don't have to feel anxious about this all the time. On the surface, in theory, yes, that makes total sense. The brain can usually get on board with that. But the problem is when these ideas, these patterns, these learning histories are stored within places like the insula and the cingulate cortex, is that the body is going to win in this front. The battle that you're dealing with in your mind, the body is going to win every single time because it's going back to an old network, an old framework that has served you up until now to keep you safe and survive. It is things that become extremely reflexive. We've mentioned the default mode network before, the easy way to do things, the routes that lead to those big neurotags of the thoughts and patterns and behaviors that we've had for a very long time, that literally gets stored in the architecture of our social brains. And then we start predicting the behaviors of other people. So we create these kind of schemas or ideas about the people that we meet, and then we unconsciously guide our reactions to them. So I know you can probably reflect back on a scenario when you have experienced this before. Can come up a lot in friendships, but also a lot, I think, in relationship. So when someone is with a new partner, let's say, and our early attachment schemas have kind of trickled into adulthood now, it is going to very much affect the quality of our relationships. But what it does is it gives us this Rolodex card or this predictable pattern, which we know that the brain loves predictable patterns, right? Because all of that means is safety and survival. But it wants to give us this Rolodex card of this person is going to be exactly like this other person was. This person is going to whatever, fill in the blank. And we very much unconsciously start guiding our own reactions towards them. So you can probably take a step back and look at how this has played out for you in your own life, to where you thought about, okay, I've been cheated on once before, like this has happened to me. I know the situation that I've gone through with this person that I'm in a new relationship with is probably going to do the same thing. So I should start to prepare for what that looks like now on the other side. And it always is going to shape our relationship to our emotional life, our immunological function, and how we experience ourselves. It impacts everything, you guys. In other words, when we start really playing into these schemas and we really start believing that everything happens under the same lens of our attachment styles, you're kind of already setting yourself up for failure in that. And so bottom line is, like, we have to do work around this, right? We have to start developing a new framework and a new way of looking at things so that connection doesn't, like, our thought of connection does not equal survival. So I want to talk a little bit about attachment and survival specifically, because as we've spoke to before, is remember our brain's number one job is safety and survival. That is all that, when you think about the brainstem and all the different parts of the brain, that's what the number one goal is. Any brain wants to stay alive. So we have specific brain areas that all are going to contribute by protecting our physical body, protecting our ego and emotional self, and by learning and adapting to pattern situations. Again, those Rolodex cards that we have built up within our brain of situations we've been through before, that gives us some kind of framework for what could potentially happen on the other side. Social survival is a definite need. And thinking about this from the attachment side is that we have to be in connection with other people in order to survive. It's that herd mentality. And when we're disconnected, or we have the perceived sense that we're disconnected from the herd, that in turn is just going to threaten our brain's idea, or literally our physical safety, as we're very much meant to be herd creatures and to do things together. That's how our framework, our wiring is. And that social survival is definitely a high need on the priority. So let's talk a little bit more. We kind of have dove in, geez Louise, into some of what these things look like when we show up in that fawning response. So we've already covered being a people pleaser. We've talked about lack of boundaries. So trouble with that. Again, I want to just throw this out there for everybody, because everybody can stand to hear it probably more times than we can all say it, is the only way that you're going to have healthy relationships is with boundaries. So if you need to do some reevaluating, some moving things around, like, that's the only way to have healthy boundaries, and you're going to have to follow up with them, which we'll talk about more. always being the yes guy, right? So you're the one that's always saying yes to whatever you're being asked of, both at work or at home, anything like that. We've talked about the codependency side. So if you're okay, I'm okay. This can even look like some of these mirroring type behaviors. And when we say mirroring, we're thinking about literally holding up a mirror to the other person. So we start adapting and practicing other people's words and behaviors. And this is a really fascinating one, you guys, to take a look at, is watch this play out for you either at the stations or with the crews or the shifts that you work on. Is you will find how people will start to adapt each other's behaviors or little quirks or sayings or things like that. Is this definitely becomes a thing very subconsciously before people start even paying attention that it's a thing. And so it's kind of fun when you start to look at it and pay attention. But the mirroring is kind of a preemptive imagining of someone's expectations and desires of other people. So if I can start molding myself into something that makes me more desirable or more capable of being accepted by the herd, then I'll do that. And I think that's not to rag on the CrossFit people at all. CrossFit is a great workout. But that you can see this and things like that play out, where if somebody is heavy into CrossFit, then there's like 5 or 6 or however many people into CrossFit. Or somebody is into this frame of eating, now everybody's doing that. And it's this constant shift of the herd mentality to kind of chameleon into whatever everybody else is doing, because we don't want to stand out. We don't want to be different from the herd, because that, again, threatens safety and survival. So we want to blend in. That can lead to a very big lack of identity or a loss of self, is because I have chameleoned in, or I have adapted into these different groups or people so much that now I don't even know really what I like or what my authentic self likes, is because I've melded into something for so long, or I've said yes so much that I really don't even know. And this is really, really super common. And it takes awareness around doing this. But on the other side, you can do a lot of exploration and have fun and play and get to know, like, what are the things that I actually like to do? What is my authentic self really like? Some other symptoms and behaviors of fawning can look like that. We talked about the overgiving. This leads into sometimes what, like we spoke to last time, the freeze and functional freeze, is when you're constantly giving and giving and giving, when the energy demand, the energy exchange is not equal, and we're giving away more energy than we're able to take back, is that constant overgiving, which is going to drive you into freeze, which is going to drive you into burnout. You are only going to have so much before you hit your capacity, and there is no more to give. And that is a real thing. Over-explaining things is one of the things that shows up for fawners. Constantly feeling like you need to justify or say your position, or again, over-explain why you're doing something. Perfectionism shows up here as well too, because if I can't get everything right, if I am seen as making a mistake or I'm seen as weak, that puts me at threat of being accepted by the herd, which again, safety and survival, that's the bottom line, right? Constantly giving to others and neglecting ourselves. And if I could say, hi, I'm Ashlea. I'm a recovering fawner. This is, like I spoke to in my episode on freeze, I had come out of a state of freeze and functional freeze because my fawn side was like full blast, 100% in the driver's seat, taking control of everything. Whenever I find myself putting my work, putting others' needs or desires, everything else above myself, and I'm in that fawn state, it only lasts for so long. It really only does. And sometimes I swear, I'm like, I got this dialed in. I'm not going to fawn. And then, yeah, here we are, fawning either whatever that looks like, saying yes or working outside of my boundaries, not holding boundaries, looking at my schedule or my calendar and seeing like, oh, I've committed to a lot of extra social things to go do on top of work. Any of these kinds of things. Once this starts to happen and I'm fawning, like I'm really good at fawning. I'm probably like a professional fawner. And again, I'm learning, just like all of you guys are, that this only lasts for so long. And so I'm hoping by sometimes going through these tough seasons where I go from fawning into functional freeze, that they become fewer and maybe shorter, but I'm still imperfect and I'm still very much learning. But I know, as I have reflected on in my post-freeze state, is that when I start to see things for myself slip, whether it's being consistent with my fitness or my workouts or eating well, it was really funny because during my, like, let's say fawn transition into freeze state is I typically don't eat gluten because gluten makes me feel like garbage can. But when I get in these spots where I have constantly been giving and neglecting myself, one of my maladaptive coping behaviors is to start eating gluten. So that's what I did. I had all of the good things like breakfast burritos and Indian food with like naan and all kinds of stuff. It was very funny on the other side of it. But one of the ways that my system tries to cope or to take care of itself is say, hey, maybe we should go eat gluten. That will probably make you feel better. That will probably, take care of these things that you're neglecting in yourself. And in hindsight, all that does is what I've learned and experienced and continue to learn, because the gut-brain axis is very much a real thing. When I do not take care of my gut health, my mental health suffers tenfold. So when I eat gluten, my system goes into full freeze mode and I go into full, pretty much almost depression with some really crazy thoughts, very nuts of how it goes, but I get into dark places when I eat gluten. I don't have another good way to explain it other than I believe in the gut-brain axis and all of the things that happen around that. So when I start to see things like that in myself slip, when I'm not taking care of myself, I'm not being protective of my sleep routines, getting enough sleep, moving my body, fueling my body, sticking to my boundaries around my schedule, if I'm overcommitting all of those things, I will for sure be sent right into a freeze response. So I'm trying to tell you these things because, listen, I'm living it too, and I want you to learn and to know and to maybe do different for yourself. But you've got to pay attention to what's going on. When we're in these fawning states, we also have a very high tendency to disconnect from our bodily sensations because they're often frequently ignored. So again, I eat gluten, my stomach hurts, I don't pay attention to that. I just say, whatever, it is what it is, I'm going to have another breakfast burrito. But we automatically say no to ourselves because I'm saying yes to something else. We go through these periods of depletion where our overflowing threat bucket is literally just overflowing all of the time. Like we don't have anything left. We have zero capacity, but somehow in our brains or in our minds, we think like, oh, I could probably take this on, or I could probably do this. I could probably say yes to this. I can probably be in this social situation and be fine. And we just continue to be in that overflowing state, that overwhelming state. We have a very hard time being able to verbalize and uphold our boundaries. Boundaries as a fawner are a threat to our safety and survival. It's a threat to our acceptance with the herd when we set boundaries and we start saying no. And we have this deep belief that others' emotional well-being and regulation is our own responsibility. And that's where this codependency, that's 100% the codependency side of that shows up, is in that case. And so when we think about the boundary side of thing, it's it's one thing really to talk about boundaries, and it's one thing to set boundaries and to have this framework around this is what we're going to do. But what we're going to do is we're going to have to start really doing or visualizing the hard thing, and we're going to have to follow through with that. And the way that we do this within our nervous system capacity is that we have to sandwich what I call these things. Is when we know we're going to have to do something that's going to be uncomfortable for us, it's going to potentially put us in that threat state, is we're going to have to come do the thing. We're going to ideally come in regulated in a good spot, do the hard thing, and then re-regulate our nervous systems. So that's showing our system like, hey, we can rewrite this new pattern. We can have this new narrative, this new belief in how we can do relationships and show up in relationships and come off the other side. That is how we rewrite this new script within the body, within the nervous system. So the daily training and the daily work with our nervous system through a variety of tools, whether it's nervous system specific tools or breathing, cold plunge, all those kinds of things, how we do that is going to reduce our stress overall, which is going to give us more capacity to be able to handle these things that are very potentially dysregulating to our system. So when we feel like there's less threat all the time, the awesome thing on the other side is this is going to give us so much more possibility to view behavior with some altitude. And we can use those higher order thinking systems like we've talked about in the prefrontal cortex to actually see what's going on, to actually decipher and make sense of, okay, my acceptance here or my idea around attachment and security is not that there's no truth in that isn't actually a thing. That's how we're able to do that. If we have more room in kind of what we refer to as like that buffer zone of the bucket, if we have more room in our bucket for the stress of behavior change and conflict and new patterning, it makes it so much easier. So it is less impactful and less detrimental to the system when we do have more room within our bucket to handle all these things. Because newsflash, like life is a lot, people are a lot, things are a lot. And so we have to have effective ways of creating more room within our bucket to deal with all this stuff. But when we actually develop a practice of feeling safe inside ourselves and mastering our nervous system, is we're going to be able to connect to that safety that is going to be able to decrease that need for codependency over time. And it's going to become less of a story written into our brains, into our network, that we have to be attached to these other people to survive, or not trusting that they are going to show up for us, or these old index cards that have stories written upon them that no longer serve us. That's how we're actually going to move out of being a fawner. And again, like you guys have heard me say probably 100 times, is it takes the work, right? And you didn't just get here overnight. Your nervous system didn't get here overnight. There's no magic wand we can use or a switch we can flip to change this, but I'm here to tell you that you can change it if you want to, but it is going to take work. And so I encourage you to start getting curious and start explore about what this nervous system work looks like. And in our episode with Flight, we talked about 3 really easy ways to start working on your nervous system through nervous system specific work, neuro drills, breathing, all kinds of things. We can be outside, get into nature, connect outside, and then intentional, authentic connection with other people. 3 very, very easy tactics that you can start to do now that are going to make a big difference. So I encourage you to start getting curious, start looking at and researching ways to take care of your nervous system, to be more regulated and show up in that regulated state. Because it's okay for us to say, hi, I'm Ashlea. I'm a recovering fawner. that acceptance is number one, right? But now we have to start making changes. Now we have to start choosing different narratives, choosing different behaviors that don't include completely self-sacrificing who we are for this false illusion or idea that that's going to keep us safe and okay on the other side. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sit Around the Fire. We're excited to keep the conversation and connection going. I invite you to check out our website, link in the description below. Also, don't wait to get signed up for the upcoming workshop, Strengthening Bonds, working on efficient communication between first responders and their partners. You can sign up for this via the website or the link in the description in the notes. We look forward to sitting around the fire again with you very soon.